Hi, this is Congressman Massie from Kentucky. We're going to try a little schoolhouse rock today. I'm in the middle of a government shutdown here, and I want to talk about why that happened, why it didn't used to happen, how we keep it from happening. Because I think this is legislative malpractice, what you're witnessing in the Senate and the House. And let me talk about that. In 1974, Congress passed something called the Congressional Budget Act. It says that we should pass 12 separate appropriations bills. That's important, and I'm going to talk about why it's important to do 12 separate bills instead of one giant bill. You've heard of these giant bills before. Sometimes they call it an omnibus, sometimes they call it continuing resolution, CR for short. Folks, that ain't normal. What we're supposed to do is pass 12 separate bills. When you put all of the government funding in one bill, when you put all your eggs in one basket, somebody can take that hostage, any faction of government. It could be the Freedom Caucus, for instance, who are good friends of mine. But today, what we're witnessing is that the Democrats in the Senate have taken government hostage. But we enabled them to do it by putting all the bills together. Senator Schumer has a demand, along with Senator Durbin. He says, I want DACA. And I'm keeping all of government hostage until I get DACA. Well, if we would have done our jobs back before September 30th, which was the actual deadline, and passed 12 separate appropriations bills and sent them to the Senate, we wouldn't be in this position. Let's talk about what those 12 separate bills are. Some of them are very non-controversial. They've passed in the House before, and I've voted for them. The first one, that's not very controversial, as you can imagine, is the legislative branch. This is the bill that funds Congress and the Library of Congress. And within that are all the senators and representatives' salaries and their staff's salaries. How many senators and representatives do you really think aren't going to vote to pay themselves? Not very many. So when this bill comes to the floor, and it has in the House, I don't know that it ever has in the Senate, it passes. And this hostage moves over here. Ledge branch. Let me talk quickly about some of the other hostages that are in the room today that don't need to be in the room. CJS, this is an appropriations bill. It stands for Commerce, Justice, and Science. So this funds the Department of Commerce, which is constitutional. It has the Patent Office in it, for instance. The Justice Department, look, we want to be holding court, right? And the judges don't collect their own taxes, so Congress has to fund that as well. And then Science, that's got NASA in it. That's a fairly non-controversial bill. And when it comes up for a vote in the House, it passes too. So this is CJS. What are some of the other ones that can make it out of the room easily with a bipartisan majority? Well, there's a bill here that funds the Department of Energy and the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, most Republicans aren't big fans of the Department of Energy. That was started by Jimmy Carter in the late 70s. But everybody's a fan of infrastructure. For instance, the Army Corps of Engineers maintains the dams and the ports, and some of these dams keep the water that may be providing your municipal water supply to your city. So this is a bill that usually passes or could pass easily with a bipartisan majority. What I'm saying is, if they bring it up in the Senate, it would get 60 votes easily, because I've seen it get a majority here in the House, a large majority. So let's put this one over here. That's the DOE and the Army Corps. What are some other ones? We've got financial services, and D.C. That's right, there's an appropriations bill to fund Washington, D.C. because it's not a state, it's a federal city. Well, guess what? 90+% of Washington, D.C. is Democrat. So the Democrats are going to vote for the bill that funds Washington, D.C. And financial services has to do with banking. Republicans aren't going to go back to their banker friends and say, oh, I'm sorry I didn't get the financial services bill passed. So that one's going to make it out of the room too. See how easy this is? I'm telling you, the 60-vote rule is not a problem in the Senate with these bills. All right, who else do we have over here that can make it out? The VA. There is a bill dedicated to funding the VA. Which Republican or Democrat is going to go back home and say, you know what, I didn't think we should fund the VA, so I voted against the bill to fund the VA? The answer is none. I have seen this bill pass the House of Representatives on its own with every member. We're not talking about getting to 218. We get to 435. And this isn't a day that you don't want to be here because you want to have your name on that VA bill. So the VA bill passes. And we've got the defense bill here. Now, Republicans and Democrats do argue, and independents, about how much we should be spending at the Department of Defense. But nobody is going to go to the floor and say we shouldn't pay our soldiers today. In fact, there have been proposals during the shutdown to pass this bill so that soldiers will get paid. I think we should pass this bill. I think we should bring it up on its own. And when we do, after all the wrangling is done about how much we're going to spend on bombers and how much on aircraft carriers and paying for the soldiers' salaries, the defense bill makes it over here, if it's voted on by itself. Okay, now we're getting to just a few bills in here that are harder to pass. One is called, I don't make these names, they were here before I got here, affectionately called THUD, one of the appropriations bills. It stands for Transportation and HUD. Now, again, this is like the bill that funds the Department of Energy and the Army Corps of Engineers. It's got some stuff that Democrats like, HUD, but it's also got transportation in it. And everybody likes transportation infrastructure. That's one of the legitimate roles of the government. So we can get THUD passed too. Transportation and HUD. By the way, folks, I've never voted for an omnibus, and I've never voted for a CR. But most of these bills that I put on this side of the fence, I have voted for, and they get bipartisan majorities very easily in the House. Well, who do we have left over here? We've got the Interior and Environment. Well, this bill, its primary function is to fund the EPA. Okay, you've got another bill over here that funds the Department of Labor, Education, I'm going to call that EDU, and HHS. That's the regulatory authority that tells you what health care you can and can't buy. A lot of Democrat priorities in here, in this bill. A lot of Democrat priorities in this bill. You've also got Homeland Security. I'm just going to put Homeland Security. That could pass, but there's a lot of discussion about immigration and funding our protection of our borders. If you're going to build a wall, it's going to be in this bill. So that is a contentious bill. I'm not going to say it makes it out of the room easily. You've also got USDA and the FDA over here. These are the folks that tell you how to farm, what you can eat, what medical devices you're allowed to use. This is regulatory authority here. There are also some farm subsidies in this bill as well. So these are the types of bills you got. You've also got a bill here that funds the State Department and foreign aid. I'm just going to call it foreign aid for now. Foreign aid. Okay, can you imagine if we had done at least part of our job, if we had done 7/12 of our job, if we had passed all the bills that Republicans and Democrats agree to, passed all the bills that can get 60 votes in the Senate, today, Chuck Schumer and Dick Durbin and the other folks over there in the Senate would be demanding that we pass DACA, or else they're going to shut down the EPA, or shut down the FDA, or shut down foreign aid, or shut down the Department of Education. How ridiculous is that? They couldn't get away with it. So by reducing the number of hostages in the room, you reduce the leverage of any faction of government here, whether, as in the case today, is Chuck Schumer, or whether that would be the Freedom Caucus at some point. And if the government did shut down as it has today, what would, these things, soldiers would be getting paid, claims would be getting processed at the VA, transportation would keep going on, HUD applications would be processed, NASA would still be funded, the rocket scientists could still go to work, DC would be funded, the Army Corps projects wouldn't slow down. All that stuff would be funded, even if somebody's having a little temper tantrum over here, like it's been going on for 3 days. So, just to close this out, what do we need to do to keep this from happening again? Because, folks, the answer today, the big, brilliant solution they came up with, was to fund the government with an all-inclusive bill for 3 more weeks. We're going to be in the same position 3 weeks from now. So the answer is to pass these bills separately. The law tells us to, the 1974 law. Let me talk a little bit about the why. Why don't they do it this way? Because it makes so much sense. They don't like to do it this way because when you debate all of these bills, it gives the membership a lot more power and the leadership has less power. When you put everything in one giant bill, called an omnibus bill, that gives the leadership, and let's say that's 4 people in the Senate and 4 people in the House, the power to do what they want behind closed doors. Then they come out from behind the closed doors and tell the membership, that would include me, you've got to vote for this bill today. We're not going to give you time to read it. Yeah, we know it's 2,000 pages long, and we know you're tired, but we want to pass this tomorrow. And if you don't vote for it, you're going to have to go home and explain to your constituents, many of whom like these things over here, why you shut down the government. That's a very powerful message that the leadership gives to rank and file members here. And most rank and file members end up voting for the all-inclusive bill. By the way, sometimes they throw extra hostages in the room like they did today. The child health care program, CHIP, was in the room today, and so was the medical device tax, something that Republicans want to get rid of. But there's another reason why this happens up here, and this has been disappointing to me. Some of my colleagues would rather just take one vote because it's pretty messy when they go on the record and start voting for all of these bills and all of the amendments that have to do with crafting these bills. Now they could be held accountable for being for something or against something. Whereas if they're presented with a choice at the end of the year, or as in this case 3 or 4 times in the year as the crises come up, if they're presented with a choice that says vote for this and the government stays open, or vote against it and the government will shut down, they can go back home and say, you know what, I felt like even though I don't want to fund foreign aid, and I don't want to fund the war on drugs, and I don't want to fund another war in the Middle East, and I don't want to fund this welfare program or X, Y, and Z, you name it. They say, you know what, but I didn't have a choice. It was all in that one bill, so I had to vote for it. That absolves them of accountability, and it makes it easier for them to get reelected. What we need to do is we need to get back to 12 appropriations bills, because we're going to be in the same situation, if not in 3 weeks, then in 3 months, or at the end of this fiscal year. So tell your congressman, tell anybody you know that works in Washington, D.C., get back to doing your job. Do 12 separate appropriations bills so we can see what you're doing, and so you don't hold government hostage ever again. Thank you very much.